So welcome again, everybody, to the STEM-based Indigenous Knowledge Panel. We are thrilled to have a representative from each of the five tribal colleges in North Dakota here to be on the panel. The way we'll approach this is I will briefly introduce each of the five, and then I will give each one of them 5 minutes to talk a little bit about STEM-based Indigenous knowledge from their perspective, and then that will leave about a half hour then at the end for questions and answers and discussion. So let's begin. First, we have President Cynthia Lindquist, who is a member of the Spirit Lake Tribe, who is president of Community College in Fort Tutton, North Dakota. We have President Twyla Baker, a member of the MHA Nation, who is the president of Nueta Hidatsa Sanish College in Newtown, North Dakota. We have President Donna Brown, member of the Turtle Mountain Band of Chippewa, who is president of the Turtle Mountain Community College in Belcourt, North Dakota. We have Dr. Mafany and Ndiva-Mongoh, an agriculture and science instructor and nature coordinator at Sitting Bull College in Fort Yates, North Dakota. And we have Mandy Guinn, the environmental science and research chair and instructor and nature coordinator at United Tribes Technical College in Bismarck, North Dakota. And so let's begin our panel, and so I'll have each of the panelists take 5 minutes to give a brief talk about their perspective of Indigenous knowledge, STEM knowledge, and I will go in the order in which I introduce them. So I will begin with Dr. Cynthia Lindquist, president of Chandeska-Chiscana Community College.
Good afternoon, everyone. Hopefully the sound's okay.
Yes, it is.
All right, great. And I did turn my video on so you can see. I'm supposed to have the Chandeska logo up there. Of course, I'm tech inefficient here or whatever. So you've got my window in my office, but it's a nice cold brisk morning here in afternoon in Fort Tutton, North Dakota. Thank you so much for inviting us to be part of this and to having this panel on Indigenous STEM knowledge. And, it's like, what is that? I was able to listen to your keynote just now, and I'm like, oh my gosh, how appropriate for us to follow Dr. Visi. It was wonderful, and throughout it, and I know to me, it was very technical science in that, but I'm like, she's talking about Indians. She's talking about Native people and who and how we are and how we live. In many of her references, it's like, that's Dakota values. That's what I know and understand. When she talked about shared leadership, her point about humility and doing your work and doing research. Those core values are the essence of the tribal colleges and universities. I believe all of you know who and what we are, but I'm not sure. And whenever I get the opportunity, so tribal colleges and universities, kind of what are we? We're institutions that were formed by our tribal governments and visionary tribal leaders about 55 years ago to address the issue of Native people not succeeding in higher education. There are 37 tribal colleges and universities. We are in 16 states. We have about 75 sites. We estimate we cover about 80% of Indian country. We serve approximately 130 to 150,000, mostly Native students, but at the national level, we also serve about 15% non-Native. In North Dakota, you have 5 tribal colleges. We serve about 3,000 to 4,000 students from our respective communities, and about 10% of our students on our campuses are non-Native. What's relevant to this conversation today in this panel is that every tribal college has as our core mission the teaching, the learning of our respective culture and languages. It's the essence of who we are. We are place-based, culturally based, land-grant institutions serving our respective communities. And then within that, we have just wonderful programming and staff. And it's all based on this thing about relationships. I need to work with UND, with NDSU, Bismarck State College, North Dakota EPSCoR, Team North Dakota, and that. To bring the breadth of what we need to do as educators to my students, to my community and that, but more importantly, to address issues. And Indigenous-based education has been here forever. And it might not have the, the science Latin names and that, but Native people have always been scientific people. They have always done our work based on resourcefulness, on industriousness, on using what's in our environment in a good way, in a respectful way. And the work of the tribal colleges that you're going to hear more from the experts, President Baker, President Brown from the other institutions, and our two respective professors from our institutions. We have some awesome things going on relative to research, STEM education, weekend academies for the high school students, the nature camps and that. And again, it's, to me, the essence of all of this is based on relationships and relationship building, which takes nurturing. Now, we're all doing this virtually. So how does all that play out? And how do we maintain what is the essence of relationships, which is human contact in this environment? And I think we're learning our way. You all, as our scientists, as our researchers, are showing us the way. Kaylin is just wonderful with the technology and making it easy for us to do these things. So I'm very honored, and I'm looking forward to the questions and answers, because I want to hear and know what are your questions about who we are and what we do. So I just wanted to give that more broad overview about the TCUs, but thank you so much for having us.
Thank you, President Lindquist. Okay, next I'd like to invite President Baker then to speak.
Thanks, Scott. Hello, everybody. It's great to see you in this venue and to talk about something that's really near and dear to my heart, of course. My Ika just got done talking about a lot of things. I'm glad she kind of gave you the what do you call it, the TCU 101, because that's really where we kind of start off at, even though we've been doing this for generations, educating our people about science and our ties to it. And really, it's been kind of an evolution on the part of Indigenous people to understanding that this knowledge has lived within us and has been propagated by us, has been nurtured by us for millennia, because of the imposition of Western knowledge systems over the top of our knowledge systems, our teaching systems, the way we recognize the world and interpreted it. It kind of stole our confidence from us in terms of our body of knowledge. But now we're getting that back. We're getting that back, and we're doing so in a way that's always been practical. That's always been applicable to our modern day context and who we are within our communities. So Native science, Indigenous science, and knowledge bodies are something that are incredibly close to me. It's where I started, quite honestly, in academia. I have a bachelor's degree in environmental geology and technology, and I somehow managed to become a college president. That's a whole other story. But I also was really active in ACES, American Indian Science and Engineering Society. I'm an ACES Sequoia Fellow, and I went all the way from being an ACES scholar, my undergraduate days, all the way to being the chair of the board a few years back. And I still am very close to that group of folks, this amazing cadre of people, Native scientists who are all over the country. We're very tight knit, do a lot of different things. So my understanding and depth of knowledge comes a lot from the association with that group. And really, Indigenous science, Native science is a recognition and integration and revitalization of our knowledge systems. into academia and industry and into our everyday lives. It's crucial for STEM, not only for diversity reasons, not only because we want to pick up hires from the Indigenous community, but because it's incredibly applicable to everyone's daily life. At the center of Indigenous science is the understanding that we are parts of a whole. Separation for the purpose of objectivity has some applications, of course, but in the end, we individual people are a part of the system. And I think that Western science can kind of forget that sometimes, that we are attached, and in our humanity, we are, what we're deciding, what we're studying, everything, it all has applications to us as human beings. And Indigenous worldview interpreted and integrated a great deal of the spiritual into our science and our experimentation and our observation to help us reach our conclusions. But that doesn't mean we absented ourselves of rational thought, nor that what we knew was not based on literally generations of understanding and evolving alongside what we were observing. We literally lived in it. We watched it. We recorded it. We didn't have the cell phones to distract us. We were observing the minutia and recording it and handing it down in our stories, in our oral histories and everything like that. Oral history is a whole nother mindset, and I could talk about all this stuff for hours. The practical application of what we knew was really what we got at. It was about survival, and traditionally speaking, we had a practical application for the knowledge that we were keeping. And that practical application actually translates into today, into what we are seeing now in terms of climate justice, environmental justice, and environmental management, solutions for the crises that we are facing today. And incidentally, a lot of what Western science discovers, to this day, Indigenous people knew about that stuff for generations. We just called it something different, maybe in a different language. It was a body of knowledge that was already there. It's just that for whatever reason, it has to be recognized by Western science for some people, not necessarily for me. So tribal colleges get involved in this in many, many different ways. We cultivate the relationships that we have with North Dakota EPSCoR, with our sister institutions across the state, tribal colleges and mainstream institutions, in developing workforce for our state, for our region. I'm thinking about stuff that we do on our own campus. We have the environmental science program. A ton of the folks that graduate from our programs, they go directly to work for our tribe. There's a huge group of people that are our alumni, our graduates, who are working in our environmental science program. And if you think about just MHA Nation alone, they're tackling things like the environmental challenges that we have on MHA Nation, our riverbed issues, our minerals development, and how we can do that responsibly. We also do a lot of community-based science and sharing of traditional knowledge. And that really kind of came in clutch. Just as an example, when the pandemic hit, we were able to use practically our knowledge, our traditional knowledge of growing food and being an agrarian tribe, and applying that to getting a grant to help us tackle food insecurity here on the reservation. I think people in North Dakota are aware of the fact that a lot of us live in food deserts. So how do we tackle that? How do we prepare for the future, for another pandemic, which we all know is probably going to happen? So, and I even think back to our historical association with science and the science camps that we had here. And I was counting up the years, and I don't want to, give away my age too much, but I participated in one of the first or second science camps that were held here on MHA Nation 25 years ago, I want to say. But now here I am back. I'm back here and doing this and wanting to grow our own. And that's really what Indigenous science has done for me personally, and also for our tribal nation. So I think I'll cut off right there so I can leave some time for my colleagues.
Okay, thank you, President Baker. Now I'd like to invite President Brown to say a few words as well.
Okay, thank you for that. Hi, everybody. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, I just can't see myself, so I wasn't sure if I was up there or not. So when I started thinking about our prompts for this discussion today, it really comes down to sovereignty for our tribes and being able to truly depend on ourselves and be our own communities. So, you know, way back in history, and not that long ago history, when we were pushed onto Indian reservations, we were so dependent on outside sources for everything, for food, for healthcare. I mean, we were just dependent on outside sources for everything. And we've become more and more self-sustaining in different areas. So for example, I would say in education and in our hospitals and our clinics, we have, you know, when I was a kid, I remember all the professionals in those areas, I would say 95% of them were non-Indians. And now that has greatly changed, that a lot of them are Native people. Where it hasn't changed a lot is in a lot of the STEM areas. And so that's, now that we've sort of balanced it out and got some well-trained Native people in these areas, we're able to start really pushing in some of these other areas. So for example, you know, one of the things that I thought about is so being able to provide our own services. So one of the examples that we talked about is our own energy sources, being able to provide our own energy sources with our wind turbine and with, you know, other kinds of sustainable energy. And so we need people that are trained in those areas to be able to work and provide that. And also, you know, be in this community from an Indigenous perspective, and particularly here from a Turtle Mountain perspective, and know our history and know our people and know what our real needs are. Some other areas that maybe somebody didn't mention yet would be our areas that are related to health and wellness. So, for example, when some people think of fitness or wellness, they think of, well, I'm going to go to the gym because I want to look really good, so everybody, you know, thinks I look great in a swimsuit or whatever. And that's not what we think about when we think about wellness. We think about functional fitness and how can I take care of myself? How can I take care of my family? How can I be healthy so that I can provide for my family and do the things that I need to do, pick up the baby, walk across the room, you know, cook, garden, and those kind of things. We think of functional fitness, not necessarily I want to look great and I hope I get on the cover of a magazine, but more how can I be, you know, self-sustaining and help my community. When I think of STEM fields also, it's not just learning that task or that technical aspect, but what we really want is individuals that are solving issues, individuals that are creative thinkers, visionaries. You know, what are some of those resources or needs that we have on our Indian reservations or in our communities that we're still hiring people from the outside to come in and provide? What are some of those things that we need our people to be trained in? So that's one of the things that we look at when we're doing our strategic planning. And then simple things like data sovereignty, cybersecurity, data privacy, you know, those kinds of things. You know, we're storing our information on somebody's server, you know, who knows where, when we could be doing those kind of things ourselves and being really professional with protecting that and being sovereign, you know, with our data. So it's things like that I think about when I think about, you know, how can we decolonize and sort of get back to some of our old ways, still utilizing technology, still being part of the 21st century, but at the same time, bringing back some of those Indigenous ways that all of a sudden people are on the outside are saying, hey, I want to do that, or I that's cool or whatever, but really it's just our way of life. So I will yield to my next colleague.
Okay, thank you, President Brown. Okay, next we have Dr. Ndiva-Mongoh. If you're there, I will.
Yep.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
So, hi everyone. I have listened with keen interest to a lot of the speeches and presentations that were made today, and I would like to actually commend our presidents from the tribal colleges, from Nuete Hidatsa, from Spirit Lake, yeah, and from Turtle Mountain, who actually gave a very succinct summary of what it is to do research, STEM research at a tribal college, and what STEM research at the tribal college is all about. You know, I would, as an instructor, a researcher at a tribal college who teaches some indigenous students on how to conduct research in a culturally sensitive and you know, respectful manner of the earth, kind of summarize a lot of this in a scientific way. What I heard our president say is a lot of the knowledge, the research knowledge we carry, or the research knowledge we try to give our students, are place based. When we talk about place based, there has to be this understanding that, you know, each of our communities have knowledge, right? They have a lot of knowledge which they they can share, and they also have cultural knowledge which is sacred. We also talk about the concept of relationships and community participation, which is very important in how we conduct research. And we we kind of down on Standing Rock had run this really simple survey. We sent it out to the community to determine what were some of the most important things that the community viewed as, things that needed to be addressed from a research perspective at Sitting Bull College. Some of the things that came back to us indicated that, a lot of what our presidents have talked about are top on the list. We talk about the land, how to protect the land. We talk about the water, how important the water is to our communities. We talk also about our relatives, relationships we have, relatives in this case being the animals, the bison, the deer, and all the animals around us. And we also talk about the health of the community. You know, there is this understanding that if the whole is not healthy, then we as individuals cannot be healthy. And taking care of everything around us is very important. So when we conduct research at most of our tribal colleges and at Sitting Bull College in particular, we take that into account. You know, we also have this understanding of the significant role, the knowledge that our elders carry forward from past generations, how important that knowledge is in guiding us in what we do. So, as it stands, most of the research we do, STEM based research, has a lot to do with finding, really awesome, I want to say really direct solutions to some of the problems that impact our communities, our reservation communities, our relatives, some of the problems that impact our most of what we see going on nowadays. You know, our presidents indicated, succinctly some of those issues, and a lot of the research we do kind of focus on those. And when you look at traditional ecological knowledge, you know, Dr. Baker mentioned the issue of, justice, you know, environmental justice, a lot of those things, and data sovereignty, how we need to have a cadre of infrastructures to help, you know, not create indigenous knowledge, but make indigenous knowledge much more visible. So, as tribal colleges, I think we play a huge role in making that knowledge visible. The knowledge has always existed. Maybe the knowledge has been, just overshadowed by mainstream science. it is our role to make that visible to the rest of the world, and that is what as tribal researchers or researchers on tribal colleges we try to do, you know. So I think I would have Ms. Guinn continue from there, and I can take any questions in detail about what I said later.
Right. Thank you. Okay. All right. So yes, our fifth panelist, then Mandy Guinn from United Tribes. I'd like to invite her to say a few words as well.
Great. Well, thank you. And I think I drew the short end of the stick here or straw, because I have to follow all the greats. And so I too, just listening to Dr. Veazey's presentation, it just honed in on everything that we encompass as a tribal college. And I think that it was so powerful, and I appreciate that. And then you get to listen to, President Brown and Baker and President Lindquist, and they are such an integral part of who we've become as TCUs. And so I will be very forthcoming that I am definitely not an expert sitting on the panel today. But it's because of these amazing mentors, President Baker, President Lindquist, that really have been generous in my 13 years at United Tribes by sharing their knowledge and their expertise with me, and even the students. And so I attribute a lot of what I've learned and what I know back to them. I've also learned to tell stories. So I want to tell a story that I really think just kind of emphasizes the difference between Western science and kind of this indigenous way of thinking. It's short, I promise. So it actually just occurred the other day. And I was attending a PhD proposal presentation at one of the mainstream institutions. And as the presentation was wrapping up, the graduate student was taking questions from faculty members. And one faculty member in particular came forth with some questions, and I'm going to kind of paraphrase the questions, but in essence, the questions were, what's novel about your project and how is it advancing this field? And I think that stopped me in my track, because I think that in essence goes against everything that traditional or indigenous knowledge teaches us. And I think it also emphasizes the exact reason why Western scientists really struggle with understanding some of this traditional knowledge in STEM. And so what do I mean? What is it, right? So when we think about traditional knowledge or indigenous knowledge, I don't think that it necessarily represents a focus on a single science, right? We've heard that. It's a system thinking or design thinking. We heard that from Dr. Veazey and some of our presidents. And it doesn't even focus on, a single environmental issue. Instead, it really encompasses these broader and multi-layered understandings or interconnections between humans and the environment. And so I think sometimes we get so caught up, and you've heard this, so caught up in the newest instruments or the newest technology that we're constantly, striving to be the best or the most novel within a single field or within a single topic. And that's not the way indigenous knowledge works, right? It's so integrative, it's holistic, it's interdisciplinary, interdependent. And so when I was thinking about today, I was also thinking about a book that I read, and I encourage you to go read it if you've never read Dr. Gregory Kahete. He's kind of somebody that's also been very instrumental in introducing native science, right, to the mainstream or the Western science way of thinking. And in his book, he says that it's not necessarily about answering a question. We don't always have to be novel or answer a question, but instead we need to find a way to resonate with the environment, with the communities, with the people. Right? And so you heard Mafany say that it's the land, it's the community, it's the people. And so That's really the Indigenous way of thinking. Very holistic. Again, I've repeated this a bunch of times, but interdependent, interdisciplinary approach to understanding the system. And you've heard the president say this as well. It's not just field specific. So it's not just architect and I use that just because of the question. It's not just engineering or science, but it incorporates things like art, culture, ethics, social, geographic, and so many other areas that we pull in. I think Dr. Baker kind of also alluded to kind of the ways that it differs in terms of the way we share our findings, right? So it's not just writing into a journal or giving a scientific presentation, but some of those traditional ways of sharing are through things like stories, ceremonies, oral history, and it's always with a family or community presence. So it's never just to a committee. And so I think, I can continue to go on, but I think everybody before me said everything. And I really think that I just want to emphasize that these two ideas, Western science and Indigenous knowledge, they don't have to be separate. They can be very integrated. So Twyla said, it's like it's been masked for so long. It doesn't have to be masked anymore. We can put those two together and really advance and move forward when we merge these two fields together. So I'll shut up. I'll let you ask questions now.
Okay, all right, thank you. Thank you. So, okay, now we've got about 28 more minutes then. So we have time for questions and discussion. Anything that you want to ask about, you want to understand better, anything that anyone has brought up that you want to ask about, that's great. Just unmute and ask a question. Fire away.
I have a question if nobody else wants.
Sure, go ahead. Go ahead, Ann.
So I've only once had a student as graduate student who told me that he had native roots. It was sort of confidential, so I don't want to go into the specifics, but so from that experience, so that student wrote one of the best master's theses I've ever seen. He was one of the best researchers already before he started working with me. But the thing that I found ironic and strange about this experience was that he was also the student where it took me the longest time to get him to unlearn the counterproductive things he learned in grade school. And I mean, I will say that for any student, even for students who have no native background, I feel that I spend a lot of time with master's students getting them to unlearn counterproductive grade school patterns. But with this student, it seemed particularly an issue because he would always do things in a great way. But then when interacting with me, it seemed like he was flipping a switch and he was working the way he expected he had to work with me. And but once we got past that, it was really maybe the strongest master's thesis I've had, at least one of them. I don't want to put down other students, but I mean, it was definitely right up there with the absolute top thesis I've had. So what my question is, I mean, how does the panel feel about this unlearning of counterproductive patterns?
So if we had the answer to that, we probably wouldn't be sitting here as a college president. We'd be out there millionaires, touting this answer, at least from my perspective, because I think from my perspective, as educators, we have a higher responsibility to accept people as they are and where they're at. And that is really, really diverse and varied. Now, just based on what you're saying about the student, it's like, okay, my mind went right to, oh, is he a product of boarding school? I mean, again, because so there's variations and striations of that and whatever that means. And that holds true for anybody, Indian or non-Indian. And
I actually one of that, but I mean, of course, based on age, but I mean, he might have had mother or grandmother also who was victim of that. That thought very strongly crossed my mind too.
Yeah. And there's also a cultural nuance relative to gender and interacting to each other. And so, like, at least for me in my generation, I was taught that anytime I'm in, like, many of my bosses were male and my mentors were men or male in that, but I had to set it up. So at least in my mind, and sometimes I would tell them that, okay, you're Dekshi, you're my uncle. Because setting the parameters in kinship terms just puts a different nuance on that relationship. And that plays into it too. But again, for Native people, it all depends upon your upbringing and traditional aspects of that upbringing. Many of our people now are urban Indians, but that does not mean they don't have that cultural context in that. So I think it behooves us as educators to be more open-minded and accepting, and then to try to help navigate and figure that out, the context of that person and who they are.
I'll add to that and say that I think he might have been experiencing something like stereotype threat, trying to be somebody that he's not, trying to be somebody that you would expect him to be, just like you said, and trying to avoid all those stereotypes that people hear about Native people. So trying to put all that aside and not, like you said, not be who he was. So that could be what was going on. And it just took a while for him to get comfortable with you and to realize that you valued who he was. And I the saying used to be tolerate. And I just hate how that used to be back in the day, and it wasn't that long ago. But actually valuing who he was and valuing his individuality and his cultural background. So, and it's just real simple things, and a lot of it, you can't really put your finger on it and say exactly what it is, but it just took a while for him to get comfortable with you, so he didn't have to worry so much about that stereotype threat.
I have to echo what Donna is talking about in terms of trust. There's a great deal of trust, and I've seen that in my career as an educator, that before these students are going to open up with me, they have to feel that they are safe, for one thing, and that they can trust me. And quite honestly, one of the barriers that I avoid and that I recognize as my privilege is the fact that I look like them. I am connected here. My name is known here. My family is here. And therefore I have a few things that I can start out with a little bit more advantage that way. And I recognize that. And I do work to gain that trust from my students. I'm very real with them. I try to be that auntie that they are looking for. And it's about relationships and relationship building. And I mean, there's so many nuances, like Dr. Brown was talking about, different things that could show up, that could have been a factor in that. And we're not that far removed from boarding school era. My dad went to a boarding school, and I spent a good deal of my academic career fighting back against the invalidation that was imposed upon me and my identity, and learning and understanding that what I know is completely valid, even more so in certain contexts than what other people think or have told me. So there's probably a lot at play there. I'm grateful for the fact that you were able to break through eventually, though.
I was so happy when that student graduated. That was the greatest experience in my career.
Again, thank you very much for the entire panel for your very very thought-provoking words, actually. So I'm going to have to go back and digest also later. And I'll continue to do that. But I have a question. So diversity in general is, I've heard some folks describe it as a means to excellence. It's not a goal, but it's the means to excellence. The way we have excellence is through diversity of all kinds. So I think minorities of all kinds experience some sort of a stereotype. I don't know what it is. It's the unconscious bias. A brown woman like me at a conference is mistaken as a wife. Not a plenary speaker, but a Black woman like me I know of one, a very decorated one, is mistaken as a cleaning lady. Okay, so I mean, these are all negative stereotypes. There's also very positive stereotypes. I know a doctor in rural North Dakota who's the only doctor. He's Sikh. Little children had a new white male doctor, and they thought, oh, he's not doctor. He's not having a turban. So there are positive stereotypes. So my question is, so are some stereotypes with as we continue to engage and involve and integrate students from the tribal colleges into the NDASIS program. We want to have more of that. What is it we shouldn't do? What are the pitfalls in I'm sure everyone has unconscious biases. What kind of pitfalls are there that we need to avoid, that we don't let our unconscious biases have these preconceived stereotypes in our head, that like that. I thought every single person from India speaks perfect English. That's what I used to think. I grew up in urban India, but I had first two students, my goodness, couldn't get the grammar right in one sentence. So I had my biases. So I just want to learn from you all. What is it we should do different or better that we don't have these stereotypes? I just want good scientists, and they're of all kinds. I don't want a Native American scientist. I want scientists, and they come like Native American. So, right?
Well, there's a lot of different things you could do. We could come at that from all kinds of different directions. Indigenous people live on a spectrum of experience, and we are not, in fact, the majority of us are not reservation based. There's a ton that are in urban areas, and their connectedness or lack thereof to their community, to their indigeneity, really runs the gamut as far as, how they might be, I can't remember the word for it, reconnecting natives, where they were taken off the reservation, have no connection to a particular community or the people that they're born to or anything like that. So that's like that might be one end of the spectrum. The other end might be, somebody like me who was born here and raised here and all that, So it's the experience of the Indigenous people, even from tribe to tribe, is so diverse in and of itself. And what I think Russ used to tell me this, Dr. McDonald, the president of United Tribes, once you've seen one Indian, you've seen one Indian. So it's really a matter of investing that time and building that trust and that relationship with that student, and I agree with you that, we do want scientists, we want Native scientists, I think having that open space for them to, either express their individuality or their identity, or not, is a good thing. It's all a good thing. So,
thank you. I'll remember that when I've seen one Indian. I love that saying. It's so true for every kind of minority. How people put stereotypes. Yeah. Thank you very much.
I would like to share one more thing as a researcher who works at a tribal college and having to work with a lot of native students. Dr. Baker makes a very salient point and a very important point about trust. About being able to let the students express themselves. And my experience personally has been that native students are very tied to their families. The connection with family is huge. And creating a space for a student to be able to express, to share those things. I know most of the time in our research facilities, we get to be all technical, and it's all about the technical, it's all about the research, it's all about the data, it's all about the test tube or the microscope or something like that. But creating a space where the student feels like they can bring their family into, you know, talking about family is very important. You know, having to make time for family discussion is very important. And kind of being able to navigate that builds a lot of trust and, in a lot of ways, brings the best out of a student when the student knows that whatever work they're trying to do does not disconnect them from their family. Because, hey, I was a researcher once at North Dakota State University or a graduate student, and I used to spend about, you know, 3, 4 a.m. in the morning in the lab waiting for some test tube or for some plate to go through the incubator or something like that. And I was lucky I did not have a family then. But for a lot of native students, they have families and families come first. Having that understanding and being able to create that environment where they are confident that they can achieve whatever research goals or whatever research outcomes they're supposed to have while not sacrificing the relationship they have with their family is absolutely important. So
I had actually unmuted to say that same thing, that family is central, and to understand that at times it might look like their commitment is waving because they are so committed to family, but it's not the truth. They are committed and they want it just as bad, but family always takes priority. And so again, like Mafany said, when we do research in our community, I do bat research, and every night we have little ones out with us that are doing the research with us, that are getting to see the bats or be in that experience, and it becomes a family event, and that's how we do everything within our college is because that is so central to who they are. So yep.
It's much easier to accommodate that in a nice, small, rural, tribal college. But at the same time, we need the infrastructure at NDSU or UND, that depth, and let alone the professionalism and the level of sophistication there and that exchange. And that's why these types of events and forums are so important, and why North Dakota EPSCoR is so important. To what we do. There's these pieces, but the essence of building trust with each other, because I think everybody wants that, but more importantly, that's the essence for Native students for success in that. And then identifying those relationships, but also those moments in time, because that's a great point about unconscious bias. And we all bring that. It doesn't matter. We all bring that with ourselves and however we grew up in that. But having a safe place where it can at least be acknowledged and looked at. So how does that play out then? And again, to me, that's the responsibility of us as educators.
If I may, I'd like to go back to the topic of the panel, which I think is a very important topic, and that's the knowledge of the Indigenous people and how it applies to STEM disciplines. I'm a professor of architecture at NDSU. This semester, I'm teaching a seminar where we're looking at the ancient knowledge, the ancient treatises on architecture from India. My students are studying that, and then they're trying to apply it with contemporary technologies like parametric modeling and algorithms and things like that. So one way in which students and researchers can be put in touch with these ancient traditions, wisdom traditions from ancient cultures, is to take that knowledge and then try to apply it with contemporary tools, technologies, scientific concepts, and things like that. In that way, they learn about the ancient wisdom traditions, and they also see the relevance of how it can be applied, say, with computation or something else. And then they begin to respect that indigenous knowledge, not as something ancient to be forgotten, but something to be taken into the contemporary culture, technology, society, science, and continue its life as a tradition. So sometimes it's seen as a spectacle, like we often do in museums, where we have these objects in glass cages, and then you give it respect, you revere it, you write about it, you have discussions about it, but it's not part of a living tradition anymore. So bringing that old ancient tradition into contemporary culture, that exercise is very important, and that's how you can keep it alive and keep respecting it. My experience with doing that with the ancient architectural treatises from India, my students actually writing algorithms and visual programming scripts to replicate the knowledge that's there in the ancient treatises. And they're literally generating designs for temples using these algorithms and visual programming scripts. So these are just the ancient treatises, but applied in a very contemporary way. That kind of living tradition, respect, and continuity is very important. And that's what we have to do with these indigenous knowledge, traditions, and wisdom, rather than just examine them from a distance.
I love that you said that they shouldn't be treated as things like exhibits in a museum. I don't think any indigenous knowledge should be treated as a curiosity to be, oh, well, that's nice and that's set on the shelf. I think as scientists, as knowledge seekers, it's our responsibility to look at these bodies of knowledge. This evidence-based knowledge, and see how it translates into our contemporary context. And we're absenting ourselves of an entire, and we're literally, thousands of bodies of knowledge. If we do that, if we just leave it on the shelf somewhere and treat it as a curiosity. And honestly, and I've told my students this before, innovation, adaptation, all of those things, those are traditional values of Indigenous people. We have managed to make it this far by doing so, by adapting to and integrating, different life ways, different challenges. We've faced so much more beyond just, Western civilization that has threatened our very existence. And yet I'm sitting here talking to you, so that's a miracle, quite in and of itself. So it's like, well, there's something to be learned there. I think about architecture, and I love that you do that. I love that, and I think about the genius of the people that built those bodies of knowledge. And I encourage you to look at them, at the ones that existed here on Turtle Island too. Like, build an earth lodge, check out earth lodges. The Mandan people, the Rikra people, the Pawnee people built earth lodges. And that was all architecture from ancient times, and we still build them. And there have been some efforts to translate that into modern, sustainable homes. Some of them which are built in the Twin Buttes area right now. People are living in them. And I love that. I love that. It's innovation using what we've already known. So
Yeah,
good on you.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because one of the weeks of my seminar is devoted to exploring the connections between these traditions in India and traditions in China and the Native American tradition. All of these ancient cultures and wisdom traditions have a lot of overlap in
Yep.
terms of what their knowledge base is. And then it's nice to see the connections. And that's another call for globalization too. It's a different kind of globalization when you link Chinese wisdom traditions with Native American wisdom traditions, with Indian wisdom traditions.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay, all right, we have a few more minutes. Anyone else then?
I'd like to suggest, if you all haven't, get Jack Weatherford's book called Indian Givers. You're all scientists in that, but
Right.
It's a great publication about the contributions Indigenous people have given this world, and it focuses on the Americas and that, and to the architect point about, our ancestors were geniuses.
Right.
And how they built, how they developed and survived and lived, but again, in a very resourceful, sustainable manner in that. And the Weatherford book just articulates all the dimensions of that. And when that book came out, I was a college student at that time, but it just really helped instill in me the pride about, oh gosh, look at all the stuff that we've done. And simple things like names that we don't even think about, that all have Native origins or basis.
Yeah, that's a nice topic to get into. So, members of the panel, what other resources, I mean, besides talking with the elders, of course, which would be the best way to do it, but like a website or a book that you think might really get someone into understanding more of the Indigenous-based STEM. And I know, like Mandy Guinn mentioned, the books that were written by Gregory Kahete. But any other resources that you can think of, though, to suggest?
I would just say really have an open mind. It doesn't have to be a book on STEM, Indigenous STEM, or whatever. It could be just about any book. Keep an open mind to something you're interested in, because no matter what you're reading, if it's written by a Native person, you're probably going to really learn something there. The other thing is, I know from being at MSU Moorhead for many years and UND for many years, there's all kinds of programming offered, maybe not so much during the pandemic, but there's all kinds of programming offered, and the Native organizations put these programs on. They bring speakers in, they have different events, even powwows. You're going to learn so much just from immersing yourself into those programs. So I would say whatever your interests are, look for books that are written by Natives on those topics, and it's really going to open your mind.
I think there's one book that I can recommend. Braiding Sweetgrass came out maybe a few years ago now. It's by Robin Wall Kimmerer, and she was actually recognized by ACES a couple of years back for that contribution. It has to do with Native science and knowledge, in particular with plants and botany, ethnobotany, and things like that. It's a wonderful read. The thing that you're going to find when you are exploring Native science, like Dr. Brown said, keep your mind open, because the way we tell our stories, the way we talk about Native science is in our old way of doing it, which is by being a storyteller. Scientists are storytellers in Indian country. And that's just the way we've conveyed this knowledge for so long. And quite honestly, I love that it still, exists, that we tell stories along with the science. You'll see that in Cajete's work. You'll see that in Gallego's work, in Robin Wall Kimmerer's work. We tell it as stories and not necessarily as a we definitely have published articles. Definitely. I don't want to, put that out there or make it too terribly mystical and magical and stuff like that. But we keep what's important to us and what works. So, and it actually kind of makes the the medicine go down easier. I love it when it comes in story form.
Yeah, and there's a native science report that's put out through the AHEC, the American Indian Higher Education Consortia. That's all the tribal college stories, our scientists, our researchers in that. And I think that's available online.
Okay, great. Well, I'd like to thank all of our panelists. It's been a great discussion. I think we should do this again next year, actually. Don't want to go out on a limb here, but thank you again for the discussion, and thanks everyone for joining in the discussion and asking questions, and because I think we were able to really take the conversation in a great direction and really cover some things that are, I think, good for everyone to hear and to contemplate. So thanks everyone.